Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to present a few ideas today at this important conference dedicated to the idea of how we can dismantle barriers and biases. And what I want to talk about today is how strategic enrollment management is changing and why it must. Now, for more than 30 years, the primary mechanism colleges and universities have been engaging in for strategic change has been strategic planning. And that's a good thing. Strategic planning helps institutions become more intentional, less reactive about how they change. It provides a system, targets, and metrics and goals that we can use to measure whether we're being effective in how we change. But increasingly, strategic planning is being recognized as problematic. It's a fairly blunt tool. What do I mean by this? Well, I see four major problems with strategic planning. First of all, it assumes we can predict an unpredictable future. After all, that's what strategic planning is trying to do. It takes a strategic look towards the future and says, in 10 years, where should we be? Or in 20 years, where should we be? But our vision of the future becomes less clear over time. Things change. The world changes. The world of higher education changes. And so the context in which we're operating becomes very different after 3 years or 5 years. And as a result, many institutions find that their strategic plan is less effective, less on target after about 3 or 5 years. They end up implementing less of it. A lot in the first year, a good amount in the second year, but less and less as time goes on. And if you think about the fact that most university strategic plans are for 10 to 25 years, they're planning for a future that looks very, very cloudy indeed. That's why my friend, the former chancellor of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Harvey Perlman, says the worst thing you can do with a strategic plan is to follow it, because the world will have changed by the time you reach that ultimate target you have in your plan. Now, the second problem I see with strategic planning is that it rarely sees below the waterline. This is borrowing from one of those iceberg metaphors that are so common. It's a model of change that was developed by the scholar and corporate professional Wilfried Kruger, who says that what we see above the waterline when we're doing strategic planning, or really any corporate or educational process, is we're looking at the time it's going to take to achieve our goals, the quality issues, the costs that it's going to incur. We do all this issue management. But the things that cause us to crash on the rocks are the things we don't expect and don't see. Those messy people issues, individual goals, individual agendas, people's hidden agendas, their alliances, their cliques, their enemies. And those are the things that actually can cause a strategic plan to fail. What happens then leads us to problem number 3. Strategic planning almost inevitably leads to mission creep. It causes most institutions to try to become something they're not. The way I describe this is, if you look at most institutions' strategic plan, if they're a community college, what are they planning to become? They want to become a 4-year college. If they're a 4-year college, they want to become a university. If they're a university, they want to become a research university. And if they're a research university, they want to become a Research One university. The result is, if every strategic plan was accomplished, higher education would look more alike. We'd have more identical institutions rather than distinctive ones. And so back in the Chronicle of Higher Education in 2014, the person who was admission director at Colby College at that time said, schools want to be something they're not. If you're Colby, you want to be Dartmouth. If you're Dartmouth, you want to be Harvard. Which always sounds to me like we're really good at doing A. So from now on, let's do Z. Let's be something that we're not good at. And at the same time we're doing that, we'll use language that really doesn't resonate well with faculty members. That's the fourth problem that I see. Now, every segment of society, every profession has its own buzzwords, its own vocabulary. In military culture, people talk about strategy and tactics and targets and winning. In the corporate world, it's all about KPIs, key performance indicators, benchmarks, SWOT analysis, return on investment. What do faculty members like to talk about? What keeps them awake at night? What do they argue about in faculty meetings? It's things like collegiality, academic freedom, tenure, critical thinking, shared governance. Well, if you look at the vocabulary that's used in strategic planning, all of it, 100% of it, comes from cultures outside the academy. And that's really not surprising. Look at that word strategic. That's a military word. And planning, well, we do planning in a lot of different segments of society. But in terms of business plans, financial plans, planning is very closely associated with the corporate world. None of those things that academics tend to care about show up in a lot of institutions' strategic plans or the way in which they present them to the faculty. And so faculty members check out. They just don't become all that involved in them. As Adriana Kazar says, using concepts foreign to the values of the academy will most likely fail to engage the very people who must bring about the change. Faculty members are a key constituent in making a strategic plan work. And if we don't speak with a vocabulary that matters to them, we leave them out. Strategic planning starts to sound to them sort of like an invasive species. And it kind of is. It wasn't developed in higher education. It was imported into higher education. Well, with all those thoughts in mind, what if we adopted an approach to strategic planning that incorporated more of the vocabulary and values that people in higher education actually care about? What would that look like? Well, I think there are 4 ways in which we can improve strategic planning by engaging in alternative processes. The first of these is scenario planning. Scenario planning says this. Look, we don't know what the future is going to be like in 10 years. But we know the sorts of things that are going to affect that future for colleges and universities. Technology is going to be different. The environment's going to be different. Politics is going to be different. And so we look at these things that we call steeple drivers from the first letters of each of them. Everything from how society is going to change to how demographics is going to change. And then we ask ourselves 3 questions about each driver. What's the best case scenario for that particular driver? What do we most hope is going to happen? What's the worst case scenario for each of those drivers? What do we most fear is going to happen? And then what do we think is the most likely case scenario for that particular driver? You see, that's what strategic planning does. It only looks at the most likely case scenario. But sometimes the most likely case scenario doesn't occur. Now, the best thing about scenario planning is you can then combine those different aspects of these drivers into different futures, such as, suppose in 10 years, we had our best case scenario in demographics. The student body grew and our primary market grew exactly as we wanted to. But we had our worst case scenario in economics. The local economy was bad, the state economy was bad, the national economy was bad, and the most likely case scenario in politics. Politics developed kind of as we expected to. What would that future look like? And then you can start subbing these things out, adding in different most likely case scenarios, worst case scenarios, best case scenarios, to imagine different types of futures. Now, you don't develop a full strategic plan for each one of those possible futures, but you get to ask the question, if the world were to look like that someday, what should we be doing now to protect ourselves? Even better, what should we be doing now so that we could thrive in a world that looked like that someday? And so you begin to think of the future as not being what you expect it to be, but what it could be. Now we can combine to that a second alternative change process, the strategic compass. What's a strategic compass? Well, a strategic plan is kind of like a map or an itinerary. It tells you exactly where you're going, how you're going to get there, and when you expect to arrive. A strategic compass outlines that general direction in which you want to move, but it doesn't give you exact routes or exact destinations, which to some people sounds like the opposite of strategic planning. Why would I want that? I want the plan so I know exactly what I'm going to do. But we have to remember what we just learned about scenario planning. Because of all those changing scenarios, those maps, those plans are going to be wrong more often than they're right. What we need is something to keep us moving in the right direction so we don't have that mission creep, so we keep doing what we're best at. Back in the 19th century, Field Marshal Helmut von Moltke said, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And for colleges and universities, the enemy is that unexpected future. Now, in the military world, as a result, the brothers Chip Heath and Dan Heath say in their book Made to Stick, commanders and generals and admirals plan differently nowadays. They do this thing called commander's intent. They say, if we do nothing else during tomorrow's mission, we have to do this. The single most important thing we must do tomorrow is this. And that keeps them guided in terms of what they absolutely have to accomplish. But what would be that compass that would keep us moving forward in the academic world? How would we set our strategic compass? Well, we might ask ourselves questions like, if we do nothing else during the next 3 years, what do we have to do? Or as a result, the single most important thing we must do this year is the following. That's our compass. That's our lodestone that keeps us moving in the right direction. Now, the third way in which we can improve strategic planning is to focus more on systems and less on goals. This idea actually comes from a sort of an unusual source. Scott Adams is the creator of Dilbert, that comic strip character who is always having trouble at work. Well, in his book, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big, he talks about all the setbacks he had in his life and how he was able to overcome them by learning to focus on systems rather than always focusing on goals. What do we mean by systems and goals? Well, goals are those targets we set ourselves. I want to lose 40 pounds. I want to run a marathon in less than 4 hours. I want to make $10 million over the course of my lifetime. Or for a university, we want to be in the top 10 in U.S. News and World Report rankings. Well, the systems are what get us there. If I'm going to lose weight, I want to eat right. I'm going to run a marathon more quickly. I have to exercise every single day. If I want to make $10 million over the course of my career, I want to be a serial entrepreneur. And if I want to improve my ranking, I need to help each student become a success in his or her own terms. Well, Adams says the problem is we set those goals, develop those systems, but then we fixate on the goals. We spend 90% or more of our energy thinking about those goals and how we're going to achieve them, and less time focusing on the systems. We've got to reverse that. We have to focus 90% or more of our attention on our systems, and once we set our goals, almost set them aside. Why? Because goals involve planning, and planning anticipates that one future that may not occur. Our systems involve preparation, and preparation embraces all the possible futures that can arise. Now, strategic planning, with the targets that it sets, then pulls the institution, or at least tries to pull the institution towards those targets, whether it's easy to move it there or not. On the other hand, systems are those big ideas, those parts of your mission that really define who you distinctly are, and then they simply carry you where you need to go. That's important because, if you have a goal, like at the end of a year, I want to lose 40 pounds, and you weigh yourself at the end of the year, and probably a lot of us have done this with our diets, and you find that you haven't lost all the weight that you want, maybe you've only lost 25 pounds. How does that feel? It feels like a failure. You're probably going to give up. Whereas if we focus instead on our system, I'm going to eat right. I am now, from now on, a person who eats right. I am a healthy eater. That's how I see myself. And every day you define yourself in terms of that system. And at the end of the year, you found that because you're a healthy eater, you've now lost 25 pounds. That feels like a success. And here's the paradox. By focusing on the goal, we're less likely to achieve the goal. By focusing on the system, we're more likely to keep using that system and lose those 40 pounds. Maybe not in 1 year, but in a year and a half or 2 years. Well, the same thing is true in the academic world. If our goal is to attract 1,000 new students, and we only get 800, that feels like a failure. And so we throw all of our plans out the window. Whereas if we focus on our system, we want to emphasize student success from now on. And we find that by doing that, we have helped 800 more students achieve their dreams. That feels like a success. And we keep building upon the parts of that system that really worked. Now, the last way in which we can modify or improve strategic planning that I want to talk about today is something called appreciative inquiry. There are a lot of books about appreciative inquiry. The one I want to recommend is the book called The Power of Appreciative Inquiry, which tells the tale near the beginning of the book of BP ProCare, one of those auto service companies that tend to be in every city and town. Well, BP ProCare had an unusual record. Its customer approval rating was 90%, and that's almost unheard of in the auto service industry. But BP ProCare said, if we're doing this well, we can do even better. So they surveyed that 10% that didn't give them high rankings, said, what are we doing wrong? And then they tried to fix what they were doing wrong and modified what they did, and they found out that their customer approval rating, instead of going up, actually plummeted. They were asking the wrong question. They were focusing on their weaknesses, not building on their strengths. And we have to turn that around. We have to focus on our strengths, not fixate on our weaknesses. So if you ask yourself, what was our university or our our college, our department like when it was at its best? What is our university or college or department best at doing? And identify that and say, well, from now on, we're going to do more of that. We're going to build on that strength. That's the way in which you get better. Or if you think back and say, what was our proudest moment as an institution? When we're at our best, what do we look like? What do we do better than anyone else? And build upon that as our plan. You're much more likely to be distinctive, achieve your goals, and implement that system that's going to help you engage in the process that will make your institution more successful. So if we take these 4 ways of improving strategic planning and putting them together, that gives us the good ideas, the ways in which we can make strategic planning not just a mental exercise and something that sits on the shelf forever, but actually makes our institutions better. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share a few ideas with you today and invite you, if you have any questions or any comments or any objections, simply to write me, jbuller@atlasleadership.com, and I'll be glad to see them and to answer you. In the meantime, I'm Jeff Buller, Senior Partner in Atlas Leadership Training. I hope you have a great conference.